Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Subscribe on your way in. We're going to be discussing the synastry in between Tesehki and Chrisean. Now, for those of you who are familiar with these two, you know that they got their rise to fame from baddies. Chrisean more so got her rise to fame from Blueface, but that's a different video for another day. And just, long story short, Chrisean was once on baddies. Then her sister kind of destiny swapped with her and kind of filled her shoes once Chrisean got pregnant and decided to exit the show. Tesehki has kind of become a little bit more well known from being on the show. She's a very good fighter. She lacks the personality that Chrisean has though. Tesehki is the more talented sister. She definitely can fight in a more skilled way than Chrisean can. A lot of people get bored with Tesehki, you know what I mean? She kind of only really makes memorable moments when she's fighting. Other than that, she's kind of just like floating about, you know what I mean? Trying to stay relevant any way that she can. I know recently she's been going back and forth with Clarissa Shields, being a clout chaser, which she's learned from her sister, Chrisean. And yeah, when it comes to these two, really, from looking at their synastry, I can tell that they're not as close as they put on. I definitely can sense that Chrisean is a sacrifice for her family. She's kind of like put everyone on, she comes from a family full of clout chasers. Usually when people rise to fame, yeah, you have those stories of certain family members coming out of the woodworks to, sell a story to the blogs or betray their family member. But it seems like with Chrisean, she allows for her family to leech off of her. She allows for her family to pull off of her frequency because she's not secure within herself. And in some way, somehow, she's like sharing her spotlight with her family. You know what I mean? And she comes from a very traumatic past history with a lot of siblings and, parents who are on substances and things like that. And I sense that Chrisean has a great deal amount of abandonment issues just because she's a Pisces, and a lot of Pisces tend to have abandonment issues, and they try to escape in different ways that they're comfortable with doing, whether that's with substances, that's with art, that's with their creativity. Maybe they're into video games, they're into watching films, or doing makeup and being very expressive with certain talents that they may have. A lot of Pisces tend to be extreme escapists out of the zodiac, and Chrisean is no different, Now, before we jump into their synastry, let me just say this. Tesehki is a Gemini, so I don't put it past her when it comes to the whole controversy of these two playing house in the past. And since Tesehki is older, that is more telling, that is a little bit more disturbing, because Gemini does deal with siblings, it deals with cousins. Gemini also represents intellect, and so these people can be very curious. And if Tesehki learned how to play house, or learn the details about that situation, she will be prone to reenacting it. Or she can be prone to using manipulation, especially manipulation through words, to get her sister to play house. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on that, but just know the possibility is there for this to be a manifestation, and I just don't put it past her. Regardless of, other people's personal opinions, a lot of people say, oh, Chrisean was jealous and she trying to destroy her sister's reputation, which may be the case. She definitely could have felt ways about her sister joining a show that she was initially a part of, and she may have felt threatened by her sister taking her position. But at the same time, I do feel as if the truth is the truth, and she decided to expose it how she exposed it, and so it is what it is. And regardless of how people feel, I do believe Chrisean. Now, when it comes to their synastry, I do have to say their relationship seems like a troubled relationship. And this is a relationship that doesn't really show any longevity. I can see these two having certain aspects that they do relate to, but then again, they do have other aspects that just point to them having a lot of difficulties, a lot of struggles. There could be a lot of jealousy intertwined. Tesehki may not understand Chrisean, in ways where Chrisean can understand Tesehki, but she may not get that same validation back in return. And so we're basically just going to discuss that. And so now, one of the aspects that I noticed that these two have is that Chrisean's sun squares Tesehki's Mercury in Gemini. And so, how this can manifest is that Tesehki can show a lack of emotional support towards Chrisean. She'll be able to vocalize it, you know what I mean? She'll be able to put it in words. You know those friends who tell you like, oh, they're here for you, they care about you, but they never show up. That's how this can manifest. Tesehki can also criticize and overanalyze Chrisean's characteristics since the sun is here. So this is everything that's at the surface dealing with Chrisean and again how people got to know her. These are her typical personality traits. So being overly emotional. Tesehki kind of can disassociate from that. She could be distant and she can be overwhelmed with that side of Chrisean. She's just very sensitive and using her emotions and all of that. She definitely could be a little distant just because Geminis aren't that emotional naturally. Another placement that I noticed is that Chrisean's Venus in Pisces squares Tesehki's Gemini sun. So how this can play out is that these two can overvalue the relationship that they have due to a superficial quality that these two share. So, you know how two people link up just because they're pretty, then other than that, they really don't have anything in common. You know, maybe they're popular and they get acquainted with each other just based off of that, you know, just based off the fact that they're popular. That's kind of how this aspect can play out. This also can manifest as these two noticing each other. So they definitely will notice each other's presence. You know, they feel that magnetic attraction, not on, you know, a sensual level, but just more so when it comes to a person's presence. Chrisean could admire Tesehki's intellect and her open mind and also the ability that she has to go with the flow. She could relate to that. On the other hand, Tesehki could admire Chrisean's intuition, her creativity. She also could appreciate Chrisean's deeper internal connection with her emotions, since that is something that she lacks. And it also can manifest as Tesehki putting Chrisean's emotions into words, but conflict can arise when Chrisean becomes overly emotional. And Tesehki could be the avoidant type, you know, very dismissive, very flighty. Tesehki can also manipulate Chrisean with the words. So just like she could put her words into emotions, she could manipulate Chrisean. And since Chrisean is a Pisces, she has to be careful with allowing people to tell her how she feels and interpretalizing her emotions, because, you know, a lot of Pisces, they're the type to go online and try to get answers for how they're feeling. They can go to outside sources such as tarot readers and psychics and things like that, since they often need like validation. They need to feel validated to be emotionally satisfied. Sometimes the answers may not come from within, and so they have to get it elsewhere. And this is where, you know, they can be very escapist and they could be extremely artistic in order to tap into that. With Chrisean being a Pisces, she just has to be aware of that, you know what I mean? She has to gain some emotional security within herself to trust herself and to trust her own intuition. Another thing that can manifest with this aspect is that Tesehki can be affectionate in public. She can manipulate how she's feeling through words, and it will be for attention. It will be just because it's the right thing to do. You know, Geminis know how to kind of navigate the press as well. They know how to navigate the internet, and they know how to trigger certain responses. And so this is where she can kind of outsmart Chrisean. But in private, she can be very detached and her words may not match her actions. Now, jumping to this next aspect, these two have their Mars trining each other. Chrisean has her Mars in Aries and Tesehki has her Mars in Leo. So they both will be animalistic, There's no doubts about that. They could be extremely active and love to move around, love to be high functioning. They also can relate a lot here since it's a trine. So they'll be unapologetic about each other's reactions to certain things, especially dealing with how they express themselves. So both can admire the way that they take charge and respond to certain impulses that they may have. Tesehki and Chrisean both can understand each other and admire how one another may handle their anger. So Chrisean could admire the way that her sister beats chicks up, you know what I mean? And she's very skilled. She's very detailed with how she fights, you know what I mean? And on the other hand, Tesehki can admire Chrisean's rage, since Chrisean is prone to being very reactionary through her emotions. She could be the type to crash out, essentially. And Tesehki can admire that. Chrisean also will be prone to tantrums. That's another thing that comes with crashing out. And Tesehki will more so be able to manage her anger. Since she has her Mars in Leo, she'll be more capable of picking her battles wisely. Whereas Chrisean, on the other hand, since she has her Mars in Aries, she's just going to be very impulsive, impatient. She may not think before she reacts, that's how Mars and Aries can operate. And so, this aspect necessarily isn't a bad one. It's just something that these two kind of can share and relate to. Now, jumping into this opposition that these two have, Chrisean has her Mercury in Pisces, and then Tesehki has her Mars in Leo at an opposition with each other. So, Chrisean can be secretly jealous of Tesehki, especially when it comes to Tesehki's ambition and her drive to perform and express her talents. So, we know that Tesehki is very comfortable with making music, and since Tesehki gets a lot of attention from her music and from being, the more skilled fighter when it comes to these two, this can make Chrisean jealous. Chrisean can also be pessimistic and express insecurity that makes Tesehki feel uncomfortable. So since Tesehki is a Leo, Leos tend to be very confident. They can be overly confident, especially if you have your Mars in Leo. You identify with confidence. And so when Chrisean is addressing certain insecurities, this definitely could make Tesehki look at Chrisean like she's a hater or like she's not supportive. Very self-centered with having her Mars in Leo. So when it comes to her artistic expression and just, her creative ideas, she may feel like Chrisean is hating on her or jealous of her, or that Chrisean is not fully expressing a type of validation that she might expect her to. And this definitely could create a lot of tension in their relationship. Chrisean has her Jupiter in Taurus, conjuncting Tesehki's Venus in Taurus. Now, this aspect can play out to where these two can be overindulgent. They can be materialistic. This also can, manifest as Tesehki being generous and accommodating with, as far as valuing the relationship that she has with Chrisean, you know what I mean? When it comes to them being sisters, she definitely could value their relationship. And on the other hand, Chrisean returns the favor by giving her sister fame and fortune. That's more so just because Chrisean has her Jupiter in Taurus, since Jupiter does deal with fame and fortune, but Taurus deals with finances. This is where she more so can, put her sister on with this aspect. Tesehki also can feel lucky and feel grateful from the abundance that Chrisean brought to the table. And, again, these two can have the same interest as far as being materialistic, wanting similar desires when it comes to fame and fortune. So this is a more lighthearted aspect. And as you guys can tell from their synastry, they have like a typical sibling relationship, I would say. But Chrisean has to be careful with Tesehki just because Geminis, I don't put anything past them. And since Chrisean is a Pisces, she can be seen as very sacrificial. She could be seen as someone who's undervalued, someone who's not appreciated. And that's where the abandonment comes into the equation. And that's where, her suffering in silence and being abandoned can be brought to the table as a possibility. And so Tesehki can be very fake. That's just the vibe that I'm getting. You know what I mean? A lot of Geminis can be one way this minute and then be totally different the next. Since Gemini rules the twins, it rules multiple personalities. You never know which side that Tesehki is going to give to Chrisean. Since these two are at odds and Chrisean has kind of like tainted Tesehki's image, I don't see these two reconciling and getting back on good terms unless they have some therapy involved. They're able to have some intervention and they're able to vocalize certain things that may have taken place in the past so that they both can grow from it and learn from it. If you enjoy the content that I'm putting out currently, I'm doing natal readings for the baddies. If you enjoy that, feel free to subscribe. I very much so appreciate it. And I will see you guys in my next video.